Next on the stage is exciting. We are going to speak about macroeconomy. Last year, there was 74 elections across the globe. 74 elections. I think it's safe to say that one election meant a little bit more than the others, right? And then I'm not saying too much around that. So on stage is, in a few moments, Bjarne Corydon, who today has the longest title of them all. He is the CEO and former editor-in-chief at Dagbladet Børsen, and soon to be Director General and CEO for Danish Radio. He will be on stage in a very few moments. We also have our very own Chief Data Officer, Andy Willis from Experian, who is leading the Northern Europe data team, and they will speak about the macroeconomic updates, because we are going to explore a little bit about the economy and the technology that actually shapes the future, and the kind of leadership that we all need to make sure that we think about and know about going into the future, so we can stay ahead. Both will present an update, short update for both of the presenters around the current views around the current situation. And the current situation, what is that? Because you almost need to check your mobile every 10 minutes to make sure that you actually have a view around what is going on. So hopefully both Andy and Bjarne did that. But without further ado, I would like to welcome Bjarne Corydon, and first Andy Willis from Experian on stage. Give him a big hand. Thank you.
Bo, thanks. Good morning, everybody. So clearly, there's a lot going on right now in macro, and I think most people are thinking about trade, tariffs, and Trump. But what I'm going to talk about is there's other things that we should be thinking about as well. I'll talk quite a lot about trade, tariffs, and Trump, but there's other things going on. So from a macro perspective, big picture, economic perspective, and also relatively long term, let's not just think about now, the next 10 minutes, the next day, the next week. I would say that there are 4 big things that we should be thinking about. And I'll run through these reasonably quickly. The first is climate and climate change. We all know it's happening. We can see it's happening. It is driving very, very significant increased costs, and will continue to do for many decades ahead to handle the changes that climate is introducing. And those costs could be anywhere between 5 and 10% of total global GDP. And total global GDP is about $100 trillion. So the bill to handle climate change is enormous. That money has got to come from somewhere. Now, is it going to be a drag on economies, or is it going to be something that drives economies forward? I think there will be winners and losers. We will see. But we should all think about and look at climate as one of the big factors for economies. The second, and I think this is probably the most interesting, is demographics and demographic change. Today, probably with the exception of Africa and 1 or 2 Asian countries, pretty much every country in the world, including China and India, we're seeing the populations change. We're seeing less young people, birth rates are falling, and we're seeing more old people as people live longer. That has very, very profound economic effects. Where are the workers going to come from to drive Denmark and Norway and Sweden and the Netherlands and Germany and America? Where are they going to come from? Are we going to have to extend pension age very significantly, so more older people working for longer? It's a really big effect. It changes every single day, and it is not going to stop anytime soon. So we need to think about demographics and how that's going to affect economies. And I'm sure many businesses are thinking about that for themselves in terms of sourcing people bringing into their businesses. Technology, we're going to talk a lot about technology throughout the course of today. Gen AI clearly is the big technology of the moment. It's a technology that has required enormous investments in North America, in China. Europe perhaps is trying to catch up. There undoubtedly are going to be winners and losers, both at country level, at company level, and at individual level. There will be people, many of us in this room, probably all of us in this room, who will get Gen AI, and we will benefit from it both in our professional lives and our personal lives. But there'll be many people who won't, for whom Gen AI will be this kind of weird thing and they don't really get it and they push it over there, and they might find themselves disenfranchised economically going forward. So technology, really important. And then geopolitics, that kind of brings me back round to trade, tariffs, Trump, but other things as well. So if I just go on to kind of geopolitics a little bit. But just finally on this section, the word that probably we all hear that is affecting the economy is uncertainty, and particularly the whole issue around trade is creating this high level of uncertainty, which is affecting behaviours at country level, at company level, and at personal level. So in terms of geopolitics, I think about two things. One is conflicts. We've clearly seen that, Ukraine and Palestine. I think we had a very worrying kind of week between India and Pakistan, and hopefully that's settled down, because that would be very bad news if that really burst up. And also political change, not just North America. We're seeing political change in Europe and in other parts of the world that are having an influence. And I think we're probably seeing three big things. The 60 or 70 years of investment in very sophisticated supply chains, just-in-time supply chains, is being challenged by conflict and the recent round of tariff introductions. People are having to think very, very seriously about how they're going to manage supply chains. So deglobalization, after 60 years of globalization, is beginning to happen. We're seeing, particularly in Europe, a lot of emphasis on spending more money on military. We have the issue in Ukraine, clearly, and we have also the Americans telling us that they're not going to fund our military going forwards. And undoubtedly, it's a wake-up call for Europe. But again, that money has got to come from somewhere. So a really big effect. And then tariffs and trade war. And I'll just kind of go on to that. And I'll go on to some of what I think are the drivers behind the American approach, the economic drivers. So why is America doing what it's doing in terms of tariffs? Well, I think, first of all, there's a real sense, and this is part of the Trump kind of mantra, is that they have been losing in trade. So America has run a trade deficit on goods, this is about goods, not services, on goods of around about $1 trillion a year for many, many years. And locally, in Europe, the biggest element of that comes from Germany. Lots of automobiles, German cars sold in America. Big trade deficit, $80 billion a year. But the big one is China. And we see lots and lots of coverage of that. Around about $290 billion a year of exports from China to America that exceed imports. So the Trump mantra was, let's make America great again. Let's build in America, and of course, tariffs is a mechanism to drive that. The next area I think is probably again linked to that. There's a sense that America is at risk of losing its economic primacy. So we can see that the chart here, the columns are the total GDP of the countries, and in the bubbles we see the growth in that GDP during the 21st century. And no great surprise, we know this. China has had an explosion in its economy. It's grown very significantly. It is catching up America. This is all kind of calculated in dollars. In many ways, perhaps the Chinese economy is already bigger than the American economy, but from a pure dollar perspective, catching up. The other big one I would talk to would be India. India is growing and accelerating, and at some point, perhaps China and India will overtake America. And I think the Americans perhaps are a little uncomfortable about that. Bjarne might talk about that. And then I think finally, and perhaps the most important, America has increased its national debt, its public debt, enormously significantly this century. It's grown by $30 trillion. And just to give you a sense, I mean, that's an enormous number. The GDP of combined of Norway and Denmark is around about $1 trillion, a little bit over $1 trillion. So that's 30 times the annual economic output of Norway and Denmark in debt, in terms of growth of debt. And you can see that America run a budget deficit pretty much every year. Now, partly that's been driven by the coronavirus crisis and by the credit crisis in 2008. But nevertheless, debt has a big impact on economies. So America paid $1.13 trillion in interest repayments on its debt last year, equivalent to the economies of Denmark and Norway. An enormous amount of money, and that will crush the country at some point if that's not managed. So we're seeing this kind of face-off, and you know, the American approach has been kind of scattergun around all countries of the world, and you know, many of which we thought we were friends of America, and we've been in the firing line. I think the Chinese knew that they weren't really friends of America, but America have been looking at China and saying, we're going to do to you what you're doing to us. You've been operating tariff systems and protectionism for years. We can't sell into your economy. We're going to do that to you. Now, we've seen in the last week a couple of kind of shifts. We've seen a trade deal in the UK, the first of the trade deals that's come out of this whole kind of process. I think that's kind of an okay trade deal. I think someone described it to me earlier as a trade deal written on a napkin, but perhaps any trade deal was a good trade deal for the Prime Minister in the UK. And then we've seen this step back between America and China. Now, is that a tactic? Is that Americans driving that, or is the Chinese in control? Is it capitulation by Trump? We don't quite know, but something is happening. Something is moving there. Let's assume this whole trade thing continues. It's likely to have negative consequences. And again, many of you will have seen this. I think most likely to be recessionary, potentially inflationary. If it's recessionary, it will have an impact on unemployment. And of course, what that does is that starts to have an effect on risk. And if you're in the lending industry or in the insurance industry, that's going to be pretty important to you. So I think the outcomes in terms of what's going on around trade and tariffs, not at all positive. Unless there's a shift. I think as Bo said, we have to check our phones every 10 minutes. There might be a shift. There could be an announcement that's come out, a tweet that's come out already that says something's changed. Let's see. If we look kind of a little bit more locally, though, and should we worry too much? And this is focused on Nordics, but I think you could look at the Netherlands, you could look at Germany. What I'm showing here is the trade flows between the Nordic countries and America. And Denmark, Sweden, and Finland all export significantly more, around about 2.5 times more to America than they import. So those countries, there's a degree of exposure, and here in Denmark, Novo Nordisk perhaps is a big part of that. And there's been lots of news over the last couple of days regarding pharma from America, and you know, apparently, America has been paying for our drugs. Apparently, there's something like that. Norway's interesting. Norway's much more in balance. So it has about the same amount of imports and exports. That doesn't mean it's going to be excluded from tariffs, but that gives you a view of kind of where the exposure is from a Nordic perspective. And then if we just move on very briefly, but we look at, I've just looked at Denmark and Norway, but we could look at Sweden and Finland and Germany and the Netherlands similarly, and see, well, where do Denmark and Norway trade? Where is that? And we can see that Denmark has got a pretty well-established trading relationship with the US in 4th place, but you know, it's got Germany and Sweden and the Netherlands significantly ahead of that, and many other countries. And you can see that both Denmark and Norway are trading with China. Maybe one of the outcomes of this kind of turbulence that we're seeing is that the established relationships, trading relationships with China and perhaps India as the fastest growing economy right now, is the way forward for Europe. Europe is a big economic bloc, but also perhaps there will be a turn away from America towards China and India, and perhaps that's where more of our future lies. But my sense is that of course we need to be concerned about what's going on in America, but we shouldn't panic. And then just in conclusion, it's not all about trade and tariffs. Climate, demographics, technology, longish term effects, but super important. The kind of geopolitics, conflicts, trade and tariffs is a very now thing, but let's not allow that to crowd out our thinking about those other factors. Undoubtedly, it's causing uncertainty, both at an individual level, at a country level, at a company level, but perhaps also it's going to create opportunity. So with that, I'm going to conclude. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand over to Bjarne.
Fantastic, Andy. I think that was a very, very sobering presentation. I think it says a lot about what data can do for you and what a sober look at data can do for you in terms of taking in a macro situation. And I'm broadly in agreement, and therefore leaving your last slide on for me, I think is lovely. I'm not going to do a lot of numbers, data, and slides. I'm going to try to complement what you did by putting on top of what you presented an assessment, a point of view, in terms of how these things combine and play out at the moment. And I'm going to do that respectfully, because I think you were mostly right on what you said. But I'm also going to put a bit of a couple of points on top of it, because you're putting these 4 blocks up, and you're right to do that. I think the numbers support that. That's what the data are telling us. But if I do a bit of psychoanalysis into what you did during your 10 minutes, you did seem to spend a bit more time on geopolitics than you did on climate change. And I think that goes for most of us at the moment. And there are 2 ways of looking at that. You can look at that as circumstantial. We're all dragged into the news circle dictated by Trump and what goes on in America, and maybe, who knows, maybe that's going to de-escalate, and then we'll come back to looking at climate events or longer trend issues like demography, or maybe even new tech innovations like DeepSeek in China or the AI jumps. That's one view. I think a second view that at least you need to test, or you need to try out when you build your own scenarios, is that the geopolitical developments we see now are not circumstantial. They are accelerators of deep trends that's been going on for a long time, and they tend to shape up how the other elements, the other structural elements, play out and combine. I think that's going to be the view I will put on top of what Andy said, and that's going to be my challenge to you. To what extent is that right? And what would that mean for your scenario building in your role as innovators? And to illustrate that, I just brought one slide, and there's no numbers in it. It's this one. Because that serves to illustrate the degree of change, the level of change that had happened during the past 10 years. The first picture is the current US president on Liberation Day presenting his tariff table, with the European Union, including Denmark, being hit pretty hard, 20% for the European Union and Denmark. The other picture, some of you remember, not all, the foreigners in the room definitely, I don't think will. I remember it well, because that's my former boss. I was finance minister of Denmark. That's my former boss, Helle Thorning-Schmidt, doing a selfie with David Cameron, then British Prime Minister, and President Obama of the US, 10 years ago at Nelson Mandela's funeral in South Africa. And the reason I brought it is that I think it illustrates the degree of change, the shift quite a lot. And I think Denmark as a case, for a Dane, obviously is very important. I think also for foreigners. Denmark in a way is a showcase in terms of illustrating what degree of change has been going on here. I mean, that the degree of that coziness, that particular moment in time at Mandela's funeral, the big thought leader of that particular age, the big progressive hope for that age, Obama too. I mean, we were founding our entire security model, our entire geopolitical thinking on that. That's been, well, the basic building block for economic policy, security policy, trade policy in Denmark for a generation. And it's now ripped apart with what you see to the right of me. So I think that illustrates the degree of change. And I think that takes you to an assessment of that change. And I've been trying to be quite involved in these conversations since Trump took over, and I must admit that I've been among the very skeptical, maybe even frightened commentators right from the beginning, right from the election back in the end of 24. And I've been following the discussions closely, also as editor-in-chief of Børsen. And I think the main paradox that I've observed has been the fundamental, the major disagreement between economists and markets on the one hand, and all other people on the other hand. I don't know where you want to count yourself there, Andy. I mean, whether you are normal people or an economist. But I think when Trump came in, when Trump got elected, and before he took over the White House, and also, I mean, in a period after that, I mean, economists were still telling us that things were very stable. I mean, the projections for the European economy, for the US economy, for the global economy, for the Danish economy, has all been quite positive. I mean, 25 is supposed to become a good year economically. By New Year, markets were telling you the same. It's a nice year. The other drivers that Andy are pointing to, I mean, they're not going to take us, I mean, forward, not least technology. And then, I mean, if you look at consumer confidence, if you look at, listen to political analysts, historians, other fields of expertise, they've been telling you we are at a sea change in terms of, what's structurally going on in the world. I mean, this is a new global order coming, and the level of uncertainty, as you pointed to in your slide, I mean, don't underestimate it. So I think that's been the big paradoxical debate, and I think where you put yourself on that line, I mean, in the crowd of economists with the market, or I mean, listening into other points of view, is actually going to determine quite a lot in terms of where you go with your decisions. Now we're back at a situation, I mean, markets are up again. There's some degree of de-escalation. Scott Bessent seems to be a bit, I mean, biting his way back into influence with Trump. There's some sense that this might be a flimsy moment in time and things might stabilize. I don't know. I think there's a couple of points I wanted to make, I mean, pointing in a different direction. And I think these points have been evident ever since Trump got elected, and maybe even before he got elected. Point number one is that we need, I mean, there's a lot of entertainment, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of color into, and there's a lot of speed into what is happening, coming out of the White House at the moment. We need to look at it in a calm, structural manner. We cannot get distracted by the colorfulness of what's happening, and we cannot get distracted by our constant attempts to predict what might happen tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And I think two things are structural about what's going on at the moment, and I think we need to pay attention to them. Item number one is that this is about ideas. I mean, obviously Trump is a very, special individual with a special approach to politics and life as such. But we need to fully understand that the ideas that are coming out of the US, the political movement, the ideological turn, is a lot broader than Trump. it's also going on in Europe. If you look at European elections, I mean, the major division line now is whether you are against the developments we are seeing and the ideas behind them, opposing it, or whether you're pushing it forward. That has determined, I mean, the Canadian election, the Australian election, it will determine the Romanian election. It's very important that the British local elections, I think, recently, the German election, maybe perhaps the Danish election, whenever we're going to have that. So it's about ideas, it's ideological, and it's a lot broader than Trump. I think that's very important. And I think the second point is that there is method to what is going on. And the method, I mean, I think the core of the method is the willingness, or even the eagerness, to play all-in poker in all negotiations, to basically combine issues and items that in the old global order, where we used to thrive and be able to predict things, were separated. These things are now combined. I think from a national interest perspective, for the European Union, for Denmark, but also for a business perspective, that means that the way you calculate scenarios and build your play needs to change, I mean, radically. Because you cannot depend on a world where there are separate and nicely ordered swim lanes. One for technology, one for security, one for trade, one for climate change. I mean, the method, the approach from this administration is that if you combine stuff in unorthodox matters, you have the cards in a manner that will be hard to stack up to for any other player on the planet, nations and companies alike. And I think the combination of these two structural things, that this is about ideas, it's a lot broader than the US, and that we're going to see negotiations and conflicts, and also, I mean, compromises, deals cut with unorthodox combination of themes, is what should guide our assessments. And that'll take me to my conclusion, and I think my time is up. I've one prediction. I think we might see de-escalation now. I think that's going to be good for the economy. It's going to be good for the world. Let's hope for the best. I think Europe is still very exposed. I mean, notice that there's been deals with the US or with the UK. There's been some kind of de-escalation with China. No such thing with Europe yet. And the next, I think the crucial next moment to watch is going to be the NATO summit in The Hague in June. We're going to have all European leaders in a room physically with Trump. And you're going to have a unique opportunity to leverage security concerns and relations into all other discussions about trade, about technology, regulation, about all the matters that concerns decision makers in this room. So watch that. And I think that the last point I wanted to make here is that, and that's coming back to Andy, I think the other topics are going to be very impacted by this geopolitical moment. I mean, climate, let's be blunt here. Action, I mean, political action on climate change is going to be very, very difficult to get at in the near future. And that's going to, I mean, nature will not, I mean, politely wait. So that's going to impact how that whole process is going to unfold. Technology in particular, I mean, I think we're going to see securitization of the competition about AI development and digital technology. That's deeply wrapped into geopolitical rivalry. And I think nations, trading blocs, are going to push forward to not be left behind and thereby exposed in terms of security on that. And I think companies will need to think about opportunities into that. I think that's my last point here. I mean, this presentation hasn't been quite optimistic. I think there are lots of opportunities in it. It is a wake-up call for lots of nations and regions. I think certainly it is for the European Union. I think it is for Denmark. And I think apart from building scenarios about risk, this is also an age of opportunity for the players that are able to assess what's going on and to move rapidly forward. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Bjarne. Entertaining and great insight as always. You want to go over here, grab
Yes.
a chair? Also you, Andy. Don't need to stand up. We can sit down, have a quick chat. Let's see, what we can agree on and what we need a little bit of a discussion around, right?
There we go.
Bjarne, you were here also last year. I don't recall, was that an optimistic speech? Because you always seems to come a little negative. Maybe it's the wrong word, but
No, I'm not known for optimism, and I think so. I like to point to problems. I think that's actually the most interesting thing. I think my point last year, and we actually exchanged views last week as well,
Yeah.
was about us approaching this moment in time where some of these basic structural underlying developments would really get entangled in a fairly dramatic manner. And I think that particular prediction I'm actually pretty fond of today.
that's a very good answer. Maybe a quick question for both of you. Why do we speak so much about the future when we know nothing? And it could have changed while we are on this stage. But we keep talking about it. You've been the editor. You could write, something the day before, and it could be completely wrong or different the day after, right?
Yeah, that's been happening a lot to me. I think all the decisions we make are obviously depend on our ability to somehow think in a structured manner about the future. And I think what I tried to do without slides and numbers, and what you tried to do in a much more substantial manner, was to get to a point where we discuss this structurally. Not discussing what we like and what we dislike, not letting it be all about words and communication and events, but trying to get at what's the underlying drivers. And I think that's a professional obligation. And I think it's even more so in this time and age. And I think it goes for every decision maker in the room. I'm completely aware that each and every one of you will need to spend 99% of your time on very, very practical issues, customers, people you manage, that are far away from these issues. But I think the 1% of your attention span should be about building your own scenarios about these structural issues.
Comments from you, Andy, around that?
I think both at a human level, but also from a business perspective, we all know that the only things that we can affect are today and tomorrow, not yesterday. So it's inevitable that we think about the future and want to think about the future. And I think, as Bjarne suggested, we look at history, we look at data, we look at facts, and we try and kind of interpret and predict the future. I think that's healthy, even if we get it wrong. Even if we wake up tomorrow morning and the world's changed again, I think that process is good because it makes for better and more informed decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. One question for you, Bjarne. I know you said that it's not all about Trump, because it's actually, what could you call it, a movement in other markets and countries also. But if we focus around Trump, because he's more or less, talk of the town these days, right? He has changed the world order right now. He changed it, right? When do you think that we can expect any kind of uniformed message, approach, or just a reaction from the Democrats in the US? Because right now it feels like, there's nothing, right? So it's just Trump,
Yeah.
And nothing else.
Yeah. Well, I think you need to wait for quite some time. And I've tried to investigate the issue. I had Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, come in to Copenhagen, I think a couple of months ago. Went to Washington, took part in the Trilateral Commission meeting there and talked to top brass Democrats. And I think what you need to understand is that, this thing about, a broader change in terms of ideas, even a revolution in terms of ideas, is not just going on in the Trump camp, in MAGA camp. It's also going on, across among Democrats. So the approaches, the points of view about how to tackle this, it is not just a cold-blooded practical discussion. There's also a war of ideas going on in the Democratic camp. And there's a very strong camp wanting to deeply polarize American politics even more and contest Trump from the far left. And then there's a pragmatic camp, basically trying to establish a new center, trying to tackle issues like, for instance, immigration, to beat him the next time around. And there's, for the moment, no agreement, no alignment, a very, very open-ended ball game. So I think you'll need to wait around for quite some time to see how that plays out. And Jake Sullivan, his input was basically, we're going to win the midterms, but we're going to do that by lying low. It's going to be about local candidates. It's not going to be a uniformed national message.
Yeah, because that was my next question. Midterm is coming up, so they cannot wait forever, right? But there is a strategy around that.
Yeah, and I think the strategy is a very humble strategy. Exploit the weaknesses of your opponent. Lean into strong local candidates, but not settling your own basic differences and disagreements. I think that's a longer-term project for them.
And a question for you, because you have been in the media and you will continue to be in the media business for quite some time, right? So if we focus around the election in the US and how that was won, it looked very much that it was won on social media, Joe Rogan podcast, reaching 50 million people. What do you think? Is that the future? Is the traditional media, is that role, completely gone now? With new ways of communicating, especially with the young generation, etc. What's your take on that? You're about to lead, the Danish radio. That's an institution here, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of answers to that. The change is certainly profound, and it's fast moving. And the answer for old media players, is a yes if they are not changing as well, but they are. And if you look at the KPIs for the institution I'm taking over, and also the level of change happening there, for instance, in terms of podcasts, they are still astonishing. I'm not just talking as a coming CEO of the Danish national broadcaster, but the KPIs on the reach of that institution, it's astonishing. Even it's above 85% of Danes that are basically leaning into that source of information. So I think the challenge will be to move it to new platforms, new formats, innovating within the institution to basically stack up against these new trends. And I think that particular battle is actually going to be quite decisive for the quality of our democracy 4, 5, 10 years going forward. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to join.
Exciting. Andy, with all the changes, turbulence, ongoing uncertainty, as we keep repeating over and over again, what is that doing to us as human beings? And especially as consumers, consumer finance from a financial perspective. What's your take on that?
Yeah, clearly there's a lot of noise, and Bjarne talked about that in his piece. There's a lot of noise, and I think for most people, the noise is bad. So people, even if they don't understand the details or the technicalities, and most people don't, understandably, but they hear the bad news. And I think the word uncertainty has been used many, many times over the last 6 weeks as a result of what happened at the beginning of April. And I think what that does is that causes people to pause in terms of, what are they going to do? Are they going to change jobs? Are they going to spend money? Are they going to invest? Because there is so much uncertainty and we don't know what tomorrow holds, even though we want to try and predict tomorrow. So I think what we're seeing is this cumulative effect of people just taking half a step back or taking a short pause before they make those decisions. And perhaps it's the bigger decisions. It's, moving house or buying a car or having an expensive holiday, and just kind of the cumulative effect of that across many tens, hundreds of millions of people globally has an economic effect. Can I also comment on the first
Yeah,
question?
yeah, sure, yeah,
that
of course,
made
of course, always, always, Andy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just this. I mean, my sense in terms of kind of what the Democrats are doing right now is they're waiting, and they don't want to shoot too many bullets too soon, because at the minute I'm not sure they would land and they would have any effect. So they're waiting. But I think there's also, and I think we've seen this, a real possibility that the American policies will backfire with the public. And I think that perhaps we've seen a couple of times a bit of a step back from the American administration. There was a wobble with the bond markets a few weeks ago and a bit of a step back. And then there's been quite a lot of talk about a drying up of the goods flow from China into the port of Los Angeles, the most important trade artery into North America, if not the world. And lots of talk that goods that people like to buy would not be on the shelves of Walmart and other major retailers. And if that were to happen, the people who perhaps voted for Trump but were more on the boundary might start to go, hang on a minute, perhaps this isn't quite as great as it was. And so perhaps in that context, the opposition in America is just taking a let's see if this thing blows up and creates the opportunity for us anyway.
Unless they're happy with cheaper medicine and cheaper eggs and, see a change in the way they live and have more money.
Perhaps they want to pay $3,000 for an iPhone.
Yeah. But can I ask Andy a question there? Because
Always.
let's play out.
Here we go. Here we go.
Now we start, right?
I'm so deep into journalism now, so I'll rather ask questions than provide answers. So let's play that out, Andy. Let's say the Democrats can actually, there's an easy win coming, midterms and maybe even 4 years. I think if you look at it historically, usually presidents they get a whooping at midterms, so that wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah.
Also, if you look at the economic performance and the consumer confidence and stuff like that. And so let's say that they're going to step a bit back. They'll still lose. They'll become lame ducks. Maybe even in 4 years, we're going to have, a president in that looks like more like something we used to. What's going to be the structural damage even in an upside scenario? Uncertainty. What degree of uncertainty is still going to be there, because we now know how fragile this is. How this is down to basically elections and individuals, and how much can we get back to? You and I, 3 years from now, your 4 blocks focusing more on climate change and demographics, celebrating the advances of technology, putting geopolitics back in its box.
Yeah. I think the optimism.
Good question.
Yeah,
It's a very good question, Bjarne. A very good question.
I've had to concentrate.
Think.
I think the optimist in me says that actually there are very significant positives here in Europe and perhaps in Southeast Asia from what is happening right now. And perhaps we have been lazy in allowing American leadership in many, many things. And perhaps we've just gone, you know what? We can't rely on that anymore. We need to look after ourselves. We've got that message loud and clear militarily. And perhaps over the last 6 weeks, that's the message economically. Europe is a very big, powerful trading bloc. Perhaps a little dysfunctional at times, but perhaps this will be a call to arms to the EU and those countries that are on the periphery of the EU, including the UK, that's getting closer again, to work together more effectively. And I think undoubtedly, as I mentioned, I think the growing prominence of India is super important, and the power of Southeast Asia led by China is super important, and perhaps this last 6 weeks is going to open up more opportunities and more possibilities than risks and uncertainties.
Yeah, because that's the Goldilocks scenario, isn't it? If you can get some degree of stabilization in our relation to the US, not accelerating the security concerns that might actually ignite a completely unpredictable situation, for instance, in The Hague, but keep the wake-up moment, keep the energy flowing from Europe, actually understanding that this is a different and more challenging situation. I think that would be the Goldilocks scenario. We need to have that on stage as well.
I am an optimist.
You are an optimist.
Yeah.
Great.
So optimist, pessimist, or both optimists now? A little bit more.
I think two elderly men trying to get to the. It's a more accurate description.
But again, it's a good question. Just before COVID, I was actually at a Börsen event where there was a little bit the same presentation as Andy did today.
Yeah.
And the conclusion was, the next 10 years, it's going to be great. 4 months later, COVID came. And then we spoke about, poly crisis, another crisis. And now this is just maybe a crisis. It's a big word, right? But it's just another bump on the way. So it's the new normal.
Yeah, but I don't want to slide back into pessimism. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I think general items here. I think first of all, to get to the Goldilocks moment or situation that Andy just beautifully put out, I think there's so many forks in the road. I mean, you're British, and if we do a double click on the trade deal your prime minister just did with the US, I think we can both. I mean, it was probably the right thing to do politically. It from a technical point of view, I think it's not a great piece of work. And then if you double click, the Financial Times did that. That's why you should still follow the established media. There's a section in that agreement about how the UK should treat other trading partners than the US from a security point of view. And some people are saying that particular section allows the US to dictate how the UK will trade with China. And you and I just put on the table for this audience that maybe we should lean slightly more towards Asia. Maybe we can play it both ways in a manner we haven't, in an agile and nice and Goldilocks manner that we haven't done up till now. I think there you have a fork in the road. I mean, are you going to, to sustain your relation with the Trump administration, are you actually going to lean away from China as a bargaining chip? Or are you able to, in an agile manner, do both? It's going to play out now for the UK. It's going to be an even bigger topic for the EU. Yeah. And I think these forks in the road, where you can actually, I mean, it's not just about it like in the old world, we could discuss differences. I mean, 20% that direction, 20% that direction. Now we're talking about, I mean, plus or minus, right or left. Yeah. I think that's an important point. And that boils right down to company affairs. That's one. And I think the second one is that we've now had a nice, wonderful conversation about big, colorful policy issues. It's all very technical. It's all very technical. I mean, trade agreements, security concerns, tariffs, taxation, or the consumer regulation that you can influence from it's going to boil down to a very, very, the uncertainty you described, it's not enough to talk about it. It's not enough to read about it in the newspaper. You need to get technical about it. And I think that's why, that's really a vital part of innovation going forward.
I probably don't want to spend too much time on the UK, but just a bit of a comment. I think my hope is that the deal that we've struck with America recently is a political tactic to placate Trump and the administration. I think to a certain extent, UK perhaps is a little trapped into a relationship with America that we position it as a special relationship and have done for decades. And perhaps in the UK, we need to change that because I think that is a trap. And my hope is that we will turn more towards Europe again and Southeast Asia and India. Well, we've done, I think, a very important trade deal with India. And so I think this is a kick up the backside for European politicians and economies to do things differently. But perhaps play the game a little bit with the Americans for a period.
And that was actually my final question, because it's what we see now with Make America Great Again. Is that actually a big opportunity to change something? It feels like we've been, ripped out of our bed, and somebody has done this. So it's actually a good thing if we play our cards in the right way from a global financial perspective.
Are you going to go first on that one?
Yeah, I mean, America is an enormous economy. It's a big trading partner, number 4 for Denmark, I think if I remember properly, number 9 for Norway, big trading partner for the Netherlands and other Nordic countries. That's not going to go away, but I mean, there is a scenario that actually what's going on in America will be good for the American economy. And so there is a kind of upside, more Goldilocks perhaps, there is an economic upside that this could stimulate the economy. And in 2 to 3 years' time, we kind of go, that was a pretty weird time, but actually it's done some good. So again, my sense is there's more opportunity. There's perhaps opportunity over the next few years with America if things do stabilize. But I think, as mentioned already, I think re-looking at Europe, India, Southeast Asia as trading partners, I think is pretty important.
I'm going to leave you with my version of optimism. I've also always liked necessities, and I think you need burning platforms to really move stuff forward. And I think there's an opportunity here for us as a nation, for the European Union, maybe even for broader alliances outside of the European Union, for companies and for individuals, to build burning platforms that are actually going to make them move forward. It's not a slogan. I think that's real. And I think the most optimistic experience I've had during the past month is that there's a crowd of people out there, very seasoned, former foreign service civil servants, now working in the private sector, now offering geopolitical advice. As you can imagine, that's been a growth sector for some time. I met one of them, and he said, when I meet Danish companies, they are so bored with me doing PowerPoint slides about uncertainty. They want to hear about opportunity. They want to hear about new trade corridors. They want to hear about, corners and ways around the maze where you can actually utilize the confusion that's going on right now, if you're sufficiently agile. For an old pessimist like me, that was really, that was a wonderful moment. So I'll leave it at that.
So we'll leave it with an optimistic Bjarne Corydon. A big round of applause. Bjarne Corydon, Andy Willis, thank you so much. Thank you.